have the last panel for the day with us this afternoon. And with us, we are lucky to have Angelou, CEO of AngelouEconomics. We have Hearn, Director from Origis Energy. And last but not least, Crum, Site Selection Practice Lead with CSRS. Gentlemen, I have your bios in front of me, but I would rather give you the chance to tell our audience what you feel is important about yourselves. So let's go alphabetically. Mr. Angelou, would you start with a little introduction of yourself?
Yeah, I hate to be on the top of the alphabetical list, but anyway, I will start. Well, have been a practitioner, like many in the audience. I ran the Austin economic development efforts for 12 years, from 1984 through 95, as VP of economic development for the chamber, as well as chief economist for the city. I left the chamber 26 years ago to start AngelouEconomics. We are a site location consulting firm, economic development consulting, as well as a lot of research and economic impact studies. On the side of strategic planning work, we only work with clients that we've known for years. I'm getting out of it. It's just been too politically and very controversial. And been there, done that, and I don't want to be dealing with politics, local politics all the time. But our site selection business is doing extremely well, and we have a couple of clients right now that we're working on, and one of them is a fairly large engagement for data centers.
Wonderful. Would you tell us a little bit about how you have been recognized, speaking of politics, by the state of Texas in your career?
Well, that's easy. I don't give much credence to those awards or anything like that. I've worked with 7 governors in the state of Texas, and for at least a couple of them, I was an appointee at major state institutions that relate to innovation. I just got off the board of the CPRIT, which is the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. I was appointed by Governor Rick Perry, and Abbott continued my tenure there. This is a $3 billion 10-year program that gives away $300 million a year to attract the best of the best in cancer research and cancer therapies. So I served there for 8 or 9 years. I believe I was one of the longest serving. And I decided that that was enough and wanted to ask to be taken off. And interestingly, I had asked to be on the Economic Development Committee until the chief of staff of the governor, who I know very well, said, Angelos, but that would not allow you to work on any project in the state of Texas for incentives. I said, no, I don't need another appointment. So,
yeah. Well, thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you for joining us, and we very much appreciate hearing from you here in a few minutes. Mr. Crum, that's a tough act to follow, but I'd like for you to tell the audience about yourself, please.
Sure. I'm Ron Crum. I'm a mechanical engineer, the most noble of all professions. I've been doing site. Wait, that was not a joke. I've been doing site selection for about 20 years. Most of my projects are in the heavy industries, steel, petrochemicals, and so forth. In the oil patch for a good portion of them. My clients are probably about 50% foreign entities, primarily at this time, Asia, including India, Pakistan, South Korea, China, and Japan. Been doing recently a lot of renewable transportation fuels projects. That includes both hydrogen as well as renewable diesel. Just wrapped up a large project on renewable diesel project. CSRS is the company I work for. They're continuing to work on that project. It made a pretty big splash in the news. It was a $9 billion renewable diesel project. Project Grown, Gron, if anybody wants to Google that. Currently, we're working on a number of sawmills. We're working on a number of petrochemical projects, about, 9 million square feet of e-commerce and logistics warehouses. We're working on one steel project, and there's probably a few more that I'm forgetting. Thank you, Rob. Rob, back to you.
Yes, sir. Last but not least, Mr. Hearn, would you tell us about yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Will Hearn. I'm currently Director of Real Estate at Origis Energy. Been with Origis for about 3 years doing, we're a leading national developer of solar plus storage, active in about 22 states, about the 5th largest solar and battery storage developer in the country. Been on a really good run lately. Prior to this, I spent about 5 years at CBRE running the Southeastern site selection and incentives practice. Prior to that was with CH2M Hill Lockwood Green for about 8 years doing site selection work for wide diversity of industries and including a lot of solar manufacturing. So basically I've been in my entire career since the early 90s in site selection.
Very good. Angelos, you still live in Texas?
I'm in Austin, Texas, and have been for the last 36 years.
I got you. Now, Ron lives in Baton Rouge. Will, where do you live?
I sit in Atlanta.
Atlanta, Georgia. Okay. All right, let's go back to Angelos, and if you would be kind enough to tell us, since our panel is focused on energy, what are some of your experiences with energy-related projects or related issues?
Well, one of the largest projects we worked on was the corporate headquarters relocation of CIDCO, the Venezuelan oil company from Tulsa to Houston. And yet another project that it was even much larger than that, and at the time probably the largest in the US, the corporate headquarters of ConocoPhillips to move outside of Houston, to move outside of Houston and go to Denver, in the Denver area. That project, unfortunately, it was implemented. They bought a site for almost $60 million, but they hired engineers and architects. And just as they were about ready to break ground, the two companies split again, Conoco and Phillips. So, just like anything else, but the project was completed from our end. We've done the site selection. And it was going to involve about 7,000 people at the corporate headquarters level and $145,000 average wage. So the trading center of ConocoPhillips would have located there, and so forth and so on. We've done several solar farms for a variety of clients. One of our best clients was Forovatio out of Portugal, that we've done several projects for them. And another one was a company out of India called RRE Solar, that we've developed a solar farm here in the Austin area, for which I think now Canadian Solar has purchased it. It was about 120 megawatt. The energy, gosh, we've done a lot of projects related to energy conservation at the public policy level for the state of Texas, as well as the state of Wisconsin, for a company here in Austin called Clear Results, which is a major player in that industry. They manage the and run the programs related to clean energy for many of the utilities around the country. There are probably a couple of thousand people now in that business. So now we're working in a community in Wyoming where we are trying to find an alternative use for 3 power plants, coal-based power plants, and convert them into something else, including perhaps helping this community attract the nuclear plant that Bill Gates and Buffett have announced for the state of, and the community we're working with is one of the 3 sites being contemplated for this project.
So based on what you've said, you've got history in the power industry. What are the changes that you're seeing looking forward and what you've experienced?
Well, over the years, obviously, one by one, every city, every utility has embraced renewable energy, which was not the case when I first got started. Everyone was concerned about the cheapest energy that they can provide, not necessarily renewable. Well, the high-tech industry and the passage of time has turned them around, where everyone is now scrambling to get either wind projects up or solar projects, because there's been a lot of social impact, I think, particularly on data centers to become more eco-friendly and more renewable based. And that trend will continue for many, many years.
Will, Angelo mentioned quite a bit the solar industry, which sounds like you're heavily invested in. Can you build on what he's touched on, and in particular, your experience in that industry, but then looking forward, how things have changed, how you expect them to change? And then I'd like for all of us to start thinking about communities that want to attract these types of projects, what they need to do to be successful at that.
Well, thank you for asking. I think it's a very, very important question, one I've sort of been pressing buttons on for the past 3 years, as both Ron and Angelos are aware. I would echo what Angelos says about consumer sentiment and the demand for renewables. I think one of the things that has sort of changed in the background is that the financing for solar farms, as most people know them, or solar arrays, or solar generation facilities, the financing for companies like Origis has when I first joined Origis, I would say the financing side of this was part of our biggest challenge to get projects financed, because a lot of the solar companies like Origis were fairly new startups. I mean, Origis kind of moved to the U.S. in 2007. And so I think the Wall Street finance and the major finance partners have become a lot more comfortable with financing solar projects. I think that's one of the big things that Angelos did not mention that I think is important to note. People talk about solar and the ITC, the investment tax credit, as a form of subsidy. But yeah, it was a subsidy, but in reality, Origis was always pricing our projects as though the ITC did not exist. But the investment tax credit really did serve a purpose to help the traditional financing sources get comfortable with solar. So I think that's one of the things that gets overlooked in the ITC. One other thing I think that's changed, two other points I would make. One of them is, with the larger shift with the closure of coal plants, which has gone on nationally. We've seen closure after closure of coal-fired plants. That generation has been, substituted with solar and natural gas primarily. And on the solar side, you've seen technology and, really the efficiency and productivity of panels has tended to double every 5 years. And so there's been a lot of technology advances in both the solar panels themselves, which are now warranted for 30 plus years. And the degradation has improved. So it's really made solar the cheapest form of energy generation out there right now. So it's become a very attractive offering for the utility companies, which serve as our primary customer base. I think that's been a big shift. And then I think the last thing I want to mention is that in terms of how things are changing, is that the consumer sentiment side, which Angelos mentioned, I think the economic development organizations in the room and those outside the room, when I first started talking about solar 3 years ago, I got a lot of people scratching their heads going, Will, what are you doing? What are you doing in solar? And now, just having attended, the Site Selectors Guild conference and gone through a lot of stuff, I sit at every table and there's strong interest across the board in solar and battery storage projects, which don't create jobs. We are not a job creator, but for 80, 100 megawatt solar project, the capital investment would be, in the $100 to $150 million range. So without great demand on services, it's great tax base and it's great diversification, and it's a great industry recruitment tool. So those are some of the shifts I've seen. I think I'll let Ron chime in here because I think he'll add to this point. We could talk about what I think the economic development organizations need to do to attract these types of investments, which I think was your phase 2 question after Ron has a chance to speak without stealing all his thunder.
Yeah, please keep that, put your thoughts together on that. Ron, what would you like to add to this discussion?
Well, and it plays in well with what we have with what Will said. We have a giant move afoot for greener fuels and greener energy. And of course, the solar is part of that. But one of the biggest users of energy in the United States is our transportation fuels. So we're making a conversion to battery, but there's a high resistance to buying electric vehicles that only get 200, 300 miles per charge. So you can basically use that vehicle for driving around town, but if it becomes a logistics nightmare, if you're trying to drive 400 miles and you have to figure out where am I going to stop for an hour to charge my vehicle. So I've been working with some green hydrogen companies. Green hydrogen is where they use electrolysis, that is an electrical feed, preferably an electrical feed from a solar array, and they use that to separate the water molecule into 2 streams, an oxygen molecule and a hydrogen molecule. The hydrogen molecule is then used for fuel cells. There are a number of hydrogen filling stations around the country, although they are rare. It is expected under the Biden administration that we will see far more green hydrogen. Green hydrogen has about 100 times the energy capacity of a battery system. So you can go much, much further on an equivalent amount of energy. So an equivalent amount. So whereas a freight truck might be able to operate on batteries and go 400 miles, if you wanted that same freight truck to deliver 600 miles, the batteries would be so large they would consume a significant portion of the cargo space and a significant portion of the 83,000 pound weight limit. However, if you switch to a hydrogen fuel truck, green hydrogen, then you can go for 1,200 miles. Also, the other thing is, as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, I just finished working on Project Grown. Project Grown is a green diesel project. There are regulations in California requiring low carbon fuels. Those same regulations are going to be adopted by, it appears, both Oregon and Washington. Canada already has a low carbon fuel mandate, as does Europe. So there's a massive demand for green fuels. And by green fuels, I mean a fuel generally that's not based on crude oil or natural gas. It's a fuel that is developed via soy oil, canola oil, or biomass. And or you can reduce your carbon content significantly by using natural gas to create your fuel as opposed to crude oil. Natural gas has 117 pounds per million BTUs, and whereas crude oil has about 220, or coal has about 220, and that's comparable to fuel oil and crude oil, but 220 pounds per million BTUs. So, and Sasol was one of the projects I worked on about 5 years ago. I wrapped this project up. It was a $21 billion, basically transportation fuels project. It was ultimately located. We looked at sites in the Marcellus Shale, and we looked at sites in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, West Virginia, the Texas Gulf Coast. Ultimately, it was constructed and now operational in Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Another little small project for you, Ron.
Yeah, yeah. When you're fooling with petrochemical plants, the numbers get huge.
It's funny how all your projects end up in Louisiana.
Well, I wish I could say that was the case.
I'm just teasing you.
I understand, but you know, where you have the infrastructure for a petrochemical project is the cheapest place to locate.
I agree, totally agree. Yeah, they do a great job.
So that limits us to the Marcellus Shale, where they have lots of the ethanes, butanes, propanes, pentanes that we need. And the Texas Gulf Coast and the Louisiana Gulf Coast are all ideal places. And the Marcellus Shale covers a good portion of New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, and New Jersey. So we can operate in any of those states when we're looking for a site for a petrochemical plant.
And we love pairing solar with hydrogen, and the hydrogen producers seem to appear to want to do that.
Tell us more about that, Will. If you'll talk about that, and eventually, I'm not surprised that we have shifted our conversation into the renewable energy components. But tell us more about that, and in particular, what sites, what communities need to do to be able to attract those types of projects.
Well, I don't have a lot of information. I can just tell you our research indicates, we're watching hydrogen. We think it could be a disruptive technology. We know there's a lot of projects in the planning phases, and what we hear and what we see in the marketplace is that it's just kind of like, it's no different than the data center market. A lot of firms that are heavy power users and have carbon restrictions or carbon limitations, or want to be perceived as doing the renewable energy pathway. They want to pair their production with solar in order to use renewable energy in their production process. And I think that's been a key driver for data centers. And we also think it's going to be kind of an interesting market to watch for the hydrogen producers. And that's kind of the general comment I have on it. But those hydrogen projects, just to Ron's point, they're going to require sites that can deliver heavy infrastructure, can port facilities can deliver raw materials and delivery to market that's not too difficult to obtain, such as pipelines and rail. So I would call them, on the scale of heavy industrial sites, I would call them the heaviest of heavy. And I think Ron would probably agree with that. And I think the other piece is going to be, those companies are going to do deep due diligence on their ability to get their production permitted, air permits and other permits that are going to be required. And that sort of tends to lend itself towards areas that have the right experience in getting those permits in place. But I think they're going to be heavy industrial. Think about the maximum level of infrastructure for rail all the way down to raw materials.
Okay. Angelos,
we just did this $9 billion project Grown, and I was surprised when you're building a green plant, you want to really, really reduce your typical emissions from NOx, nitrogen dioxide, SOx, sulfur dioxide, and so forth, and VOCs. And the project Grown, $9 billion project, and they are a minor source of emissions. They are not under US EPA regulations, they are not a major source. So you're talking a really green plant.
Yeah,
now, you still wouldn't want it in your backyard, but it's going to be a very clean plant.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
I would agree with the statements. In my view, and I've looked at hydrogen fuel. We're working on one project right now. I think that's the fuel of the future. We're going to run our course in electric vehicles, but in California already there are gas stations fueled by hydrogen fuel and cars running on hydrogen fuel. So all the issues related to safety have been resolved. And I think this is going to be the number one, just like data centers were 10 or 15 years ago. And now EV, hydrogen fuel is probably the sector that is attracting the highest level of investment. Saudi Arabia is in it, China, Russia, Germany, the US is getting behind it. We're talking about billions of dollars. So I consider this to be a fantastic growth opportunity for any one of the EDOs that are following this conversation.
I think it's probably going to take some planning on behalf of the states that want to go after it and secure it. It's probably going to take some pre-planning, some advanced understanding of what sites you want to submit, and sort of vetting those against what the known criteria are. So I think that's one of the things that states should take a look at, is starting discussions about what are the best sites to put forward and how do you do it.
Now, the other thing that's going on in this industry, and specific to the hydrogen industry, is the ability to build a filling station. Now, it's somewhat larger than a standard filling station, but you put a bank of electrolysis units on there, and you bring in the solar power, the clean power from the electrical grid. You put those electrolysis systems on there. You bring in a pipeline containing water, and then you have all the ingredients you need to produce hydrogen. The hydrogen is separated into an oxygen. You have an oxygen tank where you collect the oxygen. You have a hydrogen tank where you collect the hydrogen. And then you have dispensing pumps on the front end of this. We're talking a super clean operation. So you'd have places where the buses, your transit system buses could fill up, your long haul truckers could fill up, as well as personal vehicles fill up. Very, very clean. Yes. And so you can locate that anywhere you have a pipeline, and you can pull solar power or green power off the grid.
And to add to this, in fact, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the impact of the EV market on the economy. And one of the thoughts was, what do you do with thousands of gas stations around the US? I mean, if every state is going to outlaw fossil fuel cars, what happens with those? Well, the hydrogen fuel area is an area of opportunity for them to expand to, and maybe accelerate the development of hydrogen fuel. In any case, there is one thing that I wanted to point out, and Will, I don't know I'm correct. If I'm not, you can.
I'm sure you're correct.
But I'm sure you're correct. Solar is not the cheapest form of renewable energy. Wind is.
Wind is. Yeah.
I'm working on a $1.3 billion data center right now that wants to take power from the wind farm directly into their data center, which is a data mining operation. So cryptocurrency type of, with some of the largest players in the world involved in this business. So 1.9 cents, 1.8 cents is per kilowatt hour.
That's correct. No, that's correct. Yeah.
We have a question from the audience, and the question is, does the solar need to be located on the same site as the hydrogen plant?
Will, I'll let you take that.
No.
Well, it does not necessarily. You know, some of the companies will like to be able to take nice pictures, but if the company is of scale and they want to do it behind the meter, If they want to do it behind the meter with a battery, they can certainly do that. It just depends on what technology they want to employ. If it's behind the meter, yeah, it's probably going to be very close. Within a half a mile. If not, that solar could really be located anywhere, and
Yep.
in a transmission system, and that utility would provide the energy, which they would purchase from like Origis.
Angelos, you were shaking your head. Is there anything you want to add to this?
Well, I agree that neither wind or solar have to be nearby. You just have to buy enough capacity to put into the grid, because at the other end, you don't know whether you are taking in renewable energy or fossil fuel. Electrons cannot be separated. So as long as you are able to engage with long-term contracts with either solar companies and or wind farms and bring that energy to whatever location you desire. So solar, no, does not need to be, or wind farm is next to a hydrogen fuel.
Yeah.
Plant.
So if I can close our conversation, we haven't even touched on, we barely touched on wind power, but we're at the end of our time that we're allowed for communities that want to look into this. And you gentlemen, correct me if I'm wrong, you talked about heavy infrastructure is desirable, ports, pipelines, rail, and heavy industrial sites with permits being a key. Have I missed anything that a community should know if they want to get into this renewable energy effort?
Raul, I think that was partly a mischaracterization. If we're talking wind, I mean, you don't need any heavy infrastructure. And if you're talking solar, you don't need any heavy infrastructure. The heavy infrastructure is really required for the old Belch-Fire 8 companies that we're all familiar with lots of the stacks and so forth. If you need a source of crude oil, because you're making a lot of products from crude oil, including standard transportation fuels, then it's heavy infrastructure. These green diesel and green hydrogen plants, I mean, a green diesel plant it could be set in the middle of Illinois with all of the corn and so forth that they have there. You can put those types of plants. Typically, they're on a somewhat smaller scale than a giant 500,000 barrel a day refinery. But when you're using, like Project Grown, they bring in canola oil, they bring in soy oil, they bring in animal fats. And so if you have a source of canola oil and soybean oil via rail and animal fats, then you can build a green renewable diesel plant in your area.
Okay.
You're going to need rail to ship your product out. You're going to need rail to bring in the volumes of the oils that you need to manufacture your product. It is a heavy industry, but it does not have near the level of dependence upon the crude oil infrastructure that we have on the Texas Gulf Coast and up in the Marcellus Shale. Those plants can be located anywhere you have a good supply of the necessary raw ingredients.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, we are at the end of our time frame. When we go back to the floor, for those of us who are in the audience, table 3, you will find Ron. Table 4, you will find Angelos. And table 5, you will find Will. I want to thank you all. I wish we had more time. This is fascinating, and it's the future for us and for our children and grandchildren. So thank you for taking the time and sharing your wisdom with us. See you all at the table floor.
Thank you, Raul.
Thank you all.
Thank you.